Barb Ickes, our executive producer, was a reporter with the Quad City Times in 2005. Barb, there's so many different things that we can talk about in this story.
Right.
But I want to start with, what do you remember as a reporter covering all of this?
I remember a ton of stuff, and it's funny the details that come up, but when I think about this case, like when it occurred to me last fall that, holy cow, this is 20 years, my thoughts instantly went to Adrianne's parents. I mean, I obviously didn't have a chance to meet or know Adrianne, but I came to know Joanna and Tony and their sadness and their struggles and their victories, not just from the time of the trials, but until current day. And so naturally my thoughts go to them.
What do you remember about that weekend? Because it was a Friday night that they reported her missing. What do you remember about that weekend and then up until when her body was found?
Well, I had known Joanna as Joanna Reynolds as an acquaintance, and she knew what I did for a living, and so she called me to report to me that Adrianne was missing. She wasn't sure what to do about it, and of course I said, call the police, and she said, well, we've done this, but because of her being a teenager, and so they were waiting a little bit longer, and then she didn't show up for work, and all these things happened. And I remember on the weekend there were some posters going up, and early in the next week we started to hear the grumblings that someone had been arrested. And then I vividly remember the news conference out at the Illinois State Police headquarters in East Moline. I remember it was cold, and Jeff Taranas was the prosecutor. He was the state's attorney at the time, and he came hustling across the parking lot and said, was just shaking his head, that this was unreal. He was about to disclose publicly what had become to Adrianne after her murder. And then that news conference was, I think people, even the reporters, even the news people were shocked as details trickled out about the ages of those involved and all of it.
Well, it just was such a horrific crime.
It was.
Too. What do you think stuck out to you the most? Like, what do you remember the most today?
Oh, it was definitely their ages. It was trying to piece it together, trying to make it make sense because remember, not only Corey Gregory and Sarah Kolb, but there was the third person involved, Nathan Gaudette, who was involved in the dismemberment. And I think everybody asked themselves the same question, which was, how do you convince three teenagers, how do you convince everybody that this is a good idea? The fact that they all went along with it, the fact that it was so violent. We were all shocked to learn that it had happened in the afternoon in a parking lot of a fast food restaurant. And then, not only the dismemberment, but the attempts to burn. And it just seems like it got more disturbing as time went on. And then even, we thought we knew it all. And when the trial came, it just kept getting worse.
Yeah, talk to me about that trial with Sarah Kolb. What are some of the things that you remember learning during that? What was kind of the mood like in the courtroom?
Well, you imagine things, and sometimes your imagination is even worse than reality. In this case, it wasn't. I remember, and I don't know which trial it was either Corey's sentencing, or there was a video of Corey Gregory showing police around Black Hawk State Historic Site, which is where some of Adrianne's remains were dumped, her arms and her head. And that was another point of horror. These are kids. The idea of hiding someone's fingerprints and dental records, why is that occurring to them? You had a lot of internal questions. But there was that video of Corey showing police to those remains. And as much as you'd imagine it was just worse. I mean, you see these cars pull into this familiar place and they look like they could be getting out to have a walk. And what they're really doing is going to recover this 16-year-old's body. And so the reality of that was shocking. There are just little moments like that where, it went on for a long time. And so you were imagining certain things. And as they presented themselves in court, it just became worse.
Did you ever get the sense of, when you're sitting in court, when you're talking to, family members and friends, that were there signs that Sarah and Corey were capable of something like this?
Capable? The only signs were the letters, the book she kept in her class where she said she was going to kill Adrianne, and that's such a teenager thing to say. you wouldn't necessarily take it seriously. You know, we look back at the interviews with other kids at the school who talked about how nice Adrianne was. And I interviewed Corey Gregory's mother not long after the murder, and she was absolutely shocked. You know, he'd been a follower. This wouldn't have been something that was his idea. And, you know, Sarah was well liked. There was no history of violence with anybody. I think Nate Gaudette had a few problems, but remember, he wasn't involved in the murder. Yeah, there was just a surprise, it feels like, around every corner for the first, even through the first trial. By the second trial, we pretty much knew everything, but even then it was shocking to hear it again, and how some little bits of testimony changed.
Right, yeah, because we know that it was originally a mistrial and the jurors couldn't agree, so they moved that.
There was one juror, right, one holdout.
Does it feel to you like it's been 20 years?
No, I was shocked to look at those dates and put them together. And, you know, time is so surreal anyway, and it messes with people in different ways. Some people feel like it's been longer. No, it doesn't feel like 20 years. It feels like last summer that I went to the last Adrianne Reynolds car wash fundraiser. No, it doesn't feel like it. And when I sit and talk to Joanna and Tony and catch up the way we did, it for sure doesn't feel like 20 years, because we always pick up the same conversation. You know, it's like our dynamics will never change. We'll always relive, you know, the hotel during the trials in Dixon, and we'll always remember those early days of the search, and we'll, you know, remember certain things that happened. And that's really our only point of reference.
Yeah. Were you ever able to make sense of kind of why this happened?
Well, I tried. For many years, I tried. But one thing I did last summer was to start sending letters to Sarah Kolb, who's now Shane Kolb. He has transitioned in the Department of Corrections. And I was very straightforward and said, Shane, I want to know from you if you're up to it. You know, here we have two co-defendants who are teenagers in a murder case, and they both have transitioned. They've both undergone gender transitions in prison. And how much, if any, was that gender dysphoria a role in the murders? And I wrote to him and said, I hated to use the word curious, but that was true. I didn't want to sound maudlin about it, but I said, I'm curious, how much did this gender dysphoria rather, have to do with it? And he started right back at first. He said, you know, it's none of your business, and I'm not going to relive this murder for the media. And he was angry, and given what she went through as a 16-year-old, I could understand and sort of appreciate that. But then as time went on, and I explained to him that I'm not interested in reliving the murder. I've had enough of that. I want to know how it happened. And then he began to tell me more about, yes, he believes that gender dysphoria was part of the problem, along with the bullying and the dysfunctional family and some abuse that he suffered as a kid. And so all of that started to add up. And he had a lot of really revealing things to say, and often encouraged me to reach out to Corey, who is now Harley Quinn, and I didn't do that. I was really more interested in what Shane Kolb had to say.
Did it feel different to you, these letters, than what you had kind of heard on the stand from Kolb in that initial trial?
Well, definitely. I mean, the trial was so narrowly focused, for one thing. So Sarah had, you know, a tiny frame of reference to talk about then. And so in these letters, well, and another huge difference is it's been 20 years. And so this 16-year-old girl who sat in this courtroom day after day after day, normally with head down so that her hair covered and you couldn't make out an expression, is now a grown man, 36 years old, and is really capable of writing a strong letter that made a lot of sense and contained a lot of details. There was one little blurb I wanted to share with you, Jenna. It's when I asked specifically about gender dysphoria and what a role it played, along with the other things, Kolb wrote back, it's been nearly 20 years, it doesn't matter anymore. I'm not attempting to move away from the past, but I'm not delusional enough to think that talking about it will change the past either. It won't. I can't bring her back. While I understand your curiosity, I also don't trust it. And talking about my transition, though it may open some eyes, unfortunately, won't bring Adrianne back either. And frankly, most importantly, I refuse to take shelter behind examples of why I don't need to take responsibility for my actions. I'm not a 16-year-old child anymore. Doesn't that lead to about 50 more questions in your mind? So yes, I mean, in the end, when I came here to WQAD, I wrote back to Shane and said, you know, maybe you should tell your story. Maybe you should be the one to write your book. You understand it best, and it gets my biases out of it, and my opinions and the influence from that experience of seeing him twice go through you know, murder trials and all of it.
Well, both of them are about halfway through with their sentence right now, and 20 years later, I think when we were talking with Tony and Joanna, you know, one of the things that stuck out to me that they said is, you know, we don't think about them. We think about Adrianne and just all the beautiful things that they really remember about her.
That seemed really healthy, didn't it? Because you often hear people who have lost a family member to violence still filled with so much hatred and instill a desire for vengeance. But the thing with Tony and Joanna, they were plenty upset and mad, and all of the feelings were there. But it could have been, the dynamics could have been so different had they been different people. You didn't have the fear when you were sitting in that courtroom that Tony was going to try to, you know, jump over the galley and, you know, out of the gallery into the defense table or anything like that. And I think probably part of that had to do with their ages. Again, you know, you can be furious, but in the back, especially if you're a parent, in the back of your mind, you're also reminding yourself, these are children.
Well, Barb, thanks for talking about all this with us.
Thank you, Jenna.